Welcome to Considering Questions, a podcast about, well, questions that are important to Christians and to our lives. Considering Questions is a resource of Mile One Mission. For more information about Mile One Mission, you can check us out at mileonemission.ca. And I'm your host, Stephen Daw. And as you can see, I'm here with a friend of mine. This is Daniel. He's going to be talking today with me. Just to let you know, I'm a pastor at Calvary Baptist Church in St. John's, Newfoundland, Canada. And Daniel goes to church with me. Would you like to tell the folks a little bit about yourself, Daniel?
Yeah, I guess I've been going to Calvary now for, well, probably longer than you, Steve. I think I've been going to Calvary longer than you.
About a year and a half longer than me.
Yeah, so I've been going a bit longer than you, so I've been around for longer, so I don't know, maybe that makes me even more mature than you. We'll see.
Could be.
Could be. And I am not a vocational minister like you. I have a job out in the secular world, and I work in an office, punching numbers into spreadsheets and such. So
hence
I won't bore you with the
collar you're wearing right now and stuff.
Yes, I'm very, very well. At least that's what the top half of me is wearing, right?
All right. Well,
but yes, I'm very much in a white collar job, in an office, and I've been working in an office for probably the past 10 years. I'm going to say. I think it's been about 10 years. Yeah, or no, it's 11 years. I've been in the workforce. So.
Wow, that long.
Yeah.
My goodness, it's been a while.
It has been a while. Yes.
I can remember when you were a university student, dude.
Yes. So for those in the audience who may not know, I used to live above Steve when I was a student, and Steve lived in the basement.
Yep.
I was renting the upstairs, or me and some friends, and Steve lived in the basement. And so me and Steve go quite a way back.
Indeed. Yeah. So I actually wanted you here to help me with something. As I was saying on the promotional material that I put on Facebook and on YouTube for this thing, I recognize that since I am, a pastor, I work with people who deal with the gospel. I deal with the gospel every day, all day, every day. And my job technically is to prepare the saints for the work of the ministry. And there are actually going to be special challenges and special blessings that come from not being in, ordained pastoral ministry, but of course that are part of being a Christian. And you are more on the front lines of being a Christian than I am. Like I said, I usually talk to Christians.
Well, I'd say the front lines are in our own hearts, Steve, but
well,
yes.
Okay.
Point taken.
See, that's why you're more mature than me. All right, then. So I was just going to throw up a Bible verse and then see how you'd react to it. And then after that, I'm going to throw up the chat to see if anybody has any comments or questions for either you or I when we do that. So the text I'm going to be throwing up is Colossians chapter 3, verses 22 to 24. That's Colossians chapter 3, verses 22 to 24. And here it is. Bondservants, obey in everything those who are your earthly masters, not by way of eye service as people pleasers, but with sincerity of heart, fearing the Lord. Whatever you do, work heartily as for the Lord and not for men, knowing that from the Lord you will receive the inheritance as your reward. You are serving the Lord Christ. All right, then. So if you could react to that, that is biblical. So we believe that is God talking to us and giving us direct commands. How would you interpret that in your life?
I think the thing that stands out to me the most from that passage is the in the Lord part, right? So when we look at this passage, so Paul is specifically here. The word bondservant's actually also slave, right?
Yep.
And so now I don't want to get into the distinction between slavery in the Roman Empire and what we conceive of slavery now, but Paul is talking to slaves, so
Yep.
people who don't have a lot of choice in the matter of who they serve, and so Paul is saying that they should obey their masters in the Lord, and I think that distinction is important for us as Christians because it gets to the heart of of the type of obedience that we're both how we obey, the heart with which we do it, and the limits of our obedience. So it kind of gets to this idea that I am serving you. If you have a master, you're serving them not because that just they're your master, that you're serving them as you would the Lord, because God has put you in that situation. And then, but at the same time, it also puts a limit on your obedience in that, your job is to serve the Lord. And so if your master tells you to go, I don't know, kill someone, then our obligation is also there to serve the Lord. We're serving, we're not, it puts a limit on our level of obedience, maybe might be the best way to say it.
Right. So you're saying then if we are called to serve the our masters, I guess, the people who we work for, as to the Lord, so that means that we serve as most extremely as we can because we love the Lord, and so we would
Right.
serve according to that. But that also means then that because we're following the Lord, we wouldn't actually do sin for the sake of serving, because that wouldn't either be serving the Lord. Is that right?
Yeah, and there's a lot of ways that this kind of can come up in the workplace. So I mean, some of the examples I'll probably give today are very white collar examples. So if you live in a blue collar, so if you're from a blue collar setting, they might not translate exactly, but the principles I think still apply, right? So, for example, I do a lot of analysis of numbers, right? And and let's say that my boss wants me to lie about my numbers
Hmm.
in my analysis of these numbers for whatever reason, right? Or my boss's boss, or so on and so forth. You know, there is a point where, so in theory, we would say, well, lying is wrong. I should not lie about the numbers. I should follow God, because I'm serving them as I serve the Lord. So I will serve you. I will do what you tell me to do up to the point that you tell me to lie, and then I won't do it. But in practice, this actually becomes much more difficult than that, because the question of what constitutes a lie, and
Yeah.
if what if you want me to make assumptions that are not exactly correct, or I think are probably disingenuous, or maybe what if you want me to downplay a portion of the analysis that we have done. Like these things actually become quite difficult
Hmm.
to judge, because and you don't have a lot of time to make these decisions, because you it's very easy to just go along with what might be in your heart you feel is wrong, because well, we're good at justifying ourselves, aren't we? So
Right.
that's probably the salient point behind it.
Right. Hmm. So then, I mean, that's kind of interesting because I think too what you're saying is then that the challenge specifically there for the ways that you might be called on to sin or to do something that would be not Christian in the workplace is going to vary depending on a lot of the situations, on your job, on specifically who your boss is and what your boss needs at the given time. Um, as a Christian, how do you prepare for that kind of situation in the workplace?
Yeah, that's a good question, Stephen. And I guess the short answer is, I don't think you can prepare. Not in the sense that you can have a cheat sheet in advance where there's the list of, well, if my boss says this, I do this, or if you can't possibly prepare short of, I think, becoming a mature Christian. And that seems a bit of a cop out to say, but I think this is like vitally important, that maybe where this comes from is that it's critically important that we don't disconnect
Mhm.
our lives as a Christian and our growth as a Christian and our discipleship from our lives in the workplace. It's it's very easy, because the workplace is a little bit like a different world. It's very
Mhm.
easy to compartmentalize Daniel the father and husband from Daniel the guy who goes to church from Daniel the guy who goes to the office, and and it's really easy to separate those three people, and
Yeah.
particularly the office one. And so I think, I guess the first step is to pursue Christ, and this is part of why we get discipleship, we study God's word, we pray, but then to allow that to flow out into our workplaces, our lives in the workplace, that we don't get to the workplace and suddenly stop paying attention to all the things that we were thinking about the rest of the time.
Right. Well, I mean, that's kind of interesting to me because that kind of points to a different type of ethics than what I think modernly we think of as the best way to handle things. Like you said, a lot of what we do for ethics in the modern world is, write up lists of what would you do in this case.
Right.
And then usually you get a whole bunch of really hard cases, and then people are going to then say, well, then obviously your morality isn't all that powerful. But the Christian ethic, at least from what I understand, is to be reshaped into the image of Christ, and
Right.
then react as you need to react, which is what colloquial has been called virtue ethics.
Right.
You become a virtuous person, and
Right.
virtue is what a virtuous person would do in that situation.
I can give you a really good example of how this kind of plays out in like my life, like because I mean I do this very far less than perfectly. So like I'll pick something that we all like. If we look about the life of the church, or we look at our marriages or in our families, complaining. I'll use the thing complaining. Complaining, comes from a heart of dissatisfaction and a feeling that that an entitlement. We are entitled to more than we have. Um, and it's like the opposite of thankfulness and gratefulness, right? And complaining is, it's an epidemic in our marriages and our families. I complain about my wife instead of loving her.
Mhm.
And then we do it in the church too. But I think the thing is, we recognize it's a problem in our marriages. I think we sort of recognize it's a problem in the church, right? We're like, complaining is probably a bad idea. Being thankful better. But then we'll go to the workplace and we'll have a chat with a coworker
Mhm.
and we'll complain that we didn't get that promotion, or complain that we got more work than the other coworker, or complain about how the coworker was grumpy, or maybe even more subtly too, like even if you're not the one complaining, I'll be complicit in the complaining. So a coworker will come to me and complain, and I'll be like, yeah, they're kind of join in the gossip and so on like that. My wife is asking me who I complain
So
about to
I,
her to.
I'll just share this. I apologize, Amanda, in advance because she's going to be all embarrassed by this. Um, but anyway, I'll throw up the chat. Oh, it doesn't show up the older chats. It just shows up the new ones. Uh, Amanda did
Amanda
say,
said you complain about me to who? About me to whom?
yeah.
Uh, so
Well, to be fair, I haven't actually heard you complain about your wife to me. So I
yeah,
mean, that's saying a fair bit because I talk to you a lot.
yeah. Well,
Um,
I mean, I think even like complain to each other, or we complain in our hearts as well, right? But I guess to kind of get us back on track, to the question of the workplace, like the workplace is easy, and actually, that example maybe is a good one because even though, Amanda, I don't complain about you to my coworkers, a lot of my coworkers complain about their spouses to me.
yeah.
Um, and and it is interesting, like that line between being a godly example and being compassionate with people's real issues, but also, not, being a little bit like, but like Daniel, maybe Daniel's a great example
And you
of being
mean
in the
Daniel in the
workplace.
Bible,
I
not
mean, Daniel in the
Daniel?
Bible, not Daniel me, right?
Okay,
I was aptly named, I guess, was I?
possibly.
But you have Daniel, who is in a sort of a situation where he would have been it would have been very easy. So many of you know the story that he was that Daniel's taken into captivity. He's working for the king over there, and he gets to eat from the king's table. And he says, "No, I can't do that because that food was sacrificed to idols, and that would be wrong. It's against God's law." And so we would then what would happen is instead that they give him the vegetables, but like that would have been a very difficult thing for Daniel to stand up and do. It's insulting the king's table. Like there's an
Okay.
implicit insult in that, right? And then there's a hard cost afterwards that Daniel has to eat. Like it's this is not a prescription that we should all eat vegetable broth. Right? That's not the application
No.
of that passage. That it was they gave him not very nice food to make it worse because they wanted to rub it in
Yep.
and try to make him conform, right? And him and the other three, who we all remember by their Babylonian names for some reason. But they get the short end of the stick there. But so that's kind of the thing. Is oftentimes these things are we look at that and think, well, that was of course Daniel should have done that. But when you face that in the workplace, that's it's really hard to know you know, to when your coworker comes and complains, or you feel tempted to complain because you feel someone slighted you, to not just vent and be like, get a sympathetic ear, and
Yeah.
try and dig. And I mean, I've had people in my workplace who deserve to be complained about, if you want to put it that way too, as well, right? So I had a boss at one point who was very difficult to get along with, like, and I've had coworkers who are rude and difficult to get, and and everyone sees this, and it's easy to want to talk and complain about these coworkers, and I do it. Like, don't
Mhm.
get me wrong. Like, I don't succeed in this all the time. Like, I do complain, and I do get upset, and I do throw my coworkers under the bus sometimes when I
Yeah.
really shouldn't. But that's, I guess, the sinful nature in all of us, right? We
Yeah.
I do what I don't want to do, and I can never repeat the Paul quote, right? I always get the do's and don't do's confused.
It's a great quote, but I should probably memorize that at some point. But you're actually accenting something that I think is a standard problem for every Christian, not just, in specifically the workplace you have, but I mean, it's even a problem in the workplace that I'm in. And I work at a church, and absolutely everybody who works at my office is a Christian.
Yeah,
But I mean, because there is a sense in which we always have a desire to conform to what everybody else is doing, um, and that's for good or for ill. It's always easier to do what everybody is doing because it just feels so much easier. And I mean, that's why it's such a big deal when the three people that were working with Daniel, or even Daniel himself. And by the way, that's in the book of Daniel. If you want to look at it in the Bible, it's a good book. You should read it. A little trippy near the end, but it is something that's difficult for people to do because it's not something that we naturally do. We naturally follow along with what other people want us to do and what's expected of the society and the culture.
both
I
good
mean,
and bad. Like, people can be peer pressured into good things too. We're
right?
just naturally followers, though we have a particular tendency towards the bad things. But there is a
Um,
degree to which we will naturally follow what everyone around us is doing, or at least the appearance of it, anyways.
yeah, yeah, and I mean that's probably the best way of looking at it because it is at least it is the behavioral level of things.
Yeah.
Um, I remember reading many moons ago an article about people who go down with the ship and who are heroic during shipwrecks,
Yeah.
and they gave the difference of the example between Titanic, which took 2 hours to sink, and another ship that had been torpedoed a few months earlier that took 6 minutes to sink.
Right.
In the case of the Titanic, where they had 2 hours, people had the immediate fear thing that caused them to do exactly what their fear was moving them to do, but then after a few minutes, they began to follow through with what, first of all, their social conditioning brought them to, and second of all, what other people were doing so that they would actually they seemed to be more heroic and would do more heroic things, women and children first and that kind of stuff, instead of every man for himself, as would happen when you're still in the throes of your fear. um, you just the way that the culture does have a conditioning effect on you. I mean,
Yeah.
that's gonna and of course that's going to be an issue, especially in the workplace, because as I think you said before we came online, you said you spend more than half your waking life at work,
Right.
so it's an
Yeah,
awful lot of your time.
it is. And I think a lot of guys, and maybe there's a lot of struggles that happen with a lot of guys from the workplace too, because and many of you might know me or think but, like, you don't know me in the workplace.
Mhm.
And I don't say this because I'm like this particular, is just the nature of the workplace just means that it's a different world. Like, you're in your field of competence, right?
Yeah.
So like, I suspect if you went to just about anybody you know's workplace, you would not completely recognize the person they are, because
Mhm.
they're in their comfort zone. They've got a love. They're demonstrating competent. They're like they're competent at their job. They're their subject field expert, right? But
Yeah.
when you come around to everyone else, you're just kind of another person, and no one really understands what you do, or cares, or maybe might even think it's a waste of time.
Yeah.
And so, there is, I mean, this may be why, I suspect that it's very easy for particularly men, but it's not strictly true of men, to put so much value on work, and I mean value not beyond just, work is good. It is good to work, but it
Absolutely.
is, it like that we put so much of our self identity, our value for ourselves on it, we because that's where we feel safe and competent.
Right.
um, and then it's like divorced from the rest of our lives, and so it doesn't feel like there's, like, I can complain with limited consequences, or I can
Yeah.
gossip with limited I mean, I suppose it has implications for my work, um, but there is like, I can act differently, and the consequences are different, than they are at home and in the church.
Yeah.
And it's really easy, because of that natural separation, for me to, because there's naturally a difference between Daniel at work and Daniel just around the place. Then it's very easy for me to make that into a moral difference too. There's a,
Yeah.
like, I'm a morally different person at work than I am at home, and that's a very easy transition to make, and it happens subtly. If you don't think about it, it will happen,
Right.
naturally.
Well, and I mean, as your pastor, I've only met like a couple of your coworkers, and usually it was in social settings that you were in control of.
Right.
So I would not actually know anything about the way you act at work from
Right.
anyone but you.
Yeah, like I could be the world's worst worker, and you wouldn't know.
Yeah.
I could be lazy, and you don't know.
Nope.
Like, my wife doesn't know. There's no one actually knows, short of me, getting fired or something like that. Right? No
And
one actually. All you have to go on is my word for it.
right.
And my word is, and not even that I'm saying, like, that I'm like that. We have a tendency necessarily to lie, but we have a tendency to make ourselves look good. That's just our natural tendency, right? I
Right.
will all like even we convince ourselves that what we're saying is the truth, maybe, is the best way to put it. Um,
Well,
and
yeah, and I mean that does happen, and of course that be, brings a very large temptation then
yes,
to embrace, the sins that we're naturally heir to. I mean, it could be that you struggle with laziness, and the place that it will show is the place where you have the least number of people watching you, I guess.
right, right. That's exactly right.
Yeah.
And I suspect that's why, so many affairs start in the workplace, right?
Yeah.
Why? So, like, it's just there's a separation, and it is even easier. We're naturally predisposed to try and separate our lives into compartments,
Yeah.
to try so that we can act more immorally in certain parts of our lives than others. and and
Well,
and and it's easier to do it in the workplace.
yeah. And of course, there is a benefit to that too. I mean, God didn't create us to be able to compartmentalize so well simply because it would allow us to hide our sin. It's also so that you can focus on the numbers that are in front of you instead of, I don't know, what you're going to deal with at home when you get home from work today.
Right.
Or
No,
yeah. So
no, that's right, Stephen. And it's one of these things where, like, and maybe that kind of leaves, like, we were talking about this a bit in advance, but, oftentimes when people think about Christians in the workplace, most of the work stuff that I've heard is often centered around, well, how do I tell my coworkers about Jesus?
right.
And I'm not sure that, so don't get me, so I'm not telling you not to tell people about Jesus, right? But what I am saying is that, I'm in the workplace to work. I'm
Mhm.
not there to tell people about Jesus. And it's probably unfair to my employer, um, that if I instead of working, I spend an hour, like, discussing with my coworkers the finer points of whether or not God exists, right?
Right.
And so I think that a lot of the way that we act as a Christian in the workplace, and the way that we share the gospel, is through how we work and how we interact with our coworkers, as opposed to specifically saying, now let me tell you about Jesus.
Right.
And and you know, you got the good old CC quote, right? You know, in all things preach the gospel, but in necessary use words. Now that's been
He
much
almost
overused.
definitely didn't say that,
Yes,
but
and he
anyway.
almost definitely didn't say it, and it's one of these things where, like, you know, it's been so overused and misused and so on. But I think in some ways that principle does sort of apply
Yeah.
to the workplace, where my job is to be a good worker and a godly worker, and that means I show it by my work ethic, and I show it by my morality, like my willingness to follow God, even if it's, you know, even if it's like career costly,
Yeah.
right? And that's really hard. That is frankly really hard to do. It is very hard, and especially in some workplaces, you know, where it's some workplaces are very much a rat race. Everyone's trying to climb up on top of each other to try and get to the top, and choosing not to engage in that can be very difficult, and might mean that you stay at the bottom of the ladder for your entire career, and you don't get to achieve the quote unquote success that you might feel you should be due, or want, or pay rise that you would like. And those are costs that may very well come if you
Right.
want to actually be a Christian in the workplace, like actually act like a Christian in the workplace.
Right. And you've touched on a whole bunch of things right there too that are very, very important. Like for example, when you say that it's important that you be a worker at the workplace. I mean, I think that's what Colossians is trying to tell us, that the center point of who we are at work is we are Christians at work.
Right.
So this is what a good, solid Christian person looks like when they do work. And again, I think this. I apologize for getting all academic-y in this kind of a viewpoint, but I think this is partially why part of our culture's understanding of what morality and ethics are. I mean, we assume that it's what we do, and so when we bring that into the Christian sphere, well, what do Christians do? Well, I guess they talk about Jesus all the time.
Right.
Well,
Yeah.
no, they live their lives according to what Christ would call them to do. So, I mean, that does include talking about Jesus. Don't get me wrong. But there's an awful lot more to it than that.
Right. And I'm like, you know, I'm happy to share my faith if the opportunity arises, or we can.
Mhm.
It's just that, you know, my goal should not be I'm going to go to work today and try and manufacture a conversation.
Right.
If actually, to be honest, like probably the best way, and this is maybe a whole different topic for another time, is if you want to witness to your coworkers, I think hospitality is the way to do it.
Okay.
So get them into your home, and that maybe that's we haven't chat about that sometime. Maybe you can get my wife on. She's very passionate about hospitality. But I think if we're gonna reach our coworkers, you know, with like, and actually it's gonna have to happen outside the workplace, the actual speaking of the gospel to them, and or mostly happen outside the work. I'm not saying it can't happen. You know, you're having a coffee break. You can have, like, it's more that our time at work should be dominated by a work ethic, and we should
Right.
be, you know, like I think like that the Christians should be known for being the best sort of workers to have.
Right.
And like ideally your employer should both dislike you and like you. They should like you because of how hard and diligently and honestly you work, and they should dislike you because you're a stick in the mud because you refuse to do things that you think are wrong.
Right. And
Even if
that's
it makes their life more difficult. And there's really and there's so many ways that plays out, just even from like in my workplace, you know, even the question of leave, like, you know,
Yeah.
I got to submit leave, and you know, I'm like are you going to be honest about how you do that, right?
Yeah.
Right. When it's easy to kind of cheat the system, or I don't know, like if you're in a workplace where you have a time punch card, and I know of workplaces where people, like, it is just ingrained in the system, everyone cheats the system together, and everyone
Yeah.
understands it, the employer understands it, the employees understand it, but that doesn't make it right.
Right.
Even if everyone knows and accepts that is the way things are done, that doesn't
Yeah.
make it right. And that makes you stand out and could be uncomfortable and difficult and cost you money
Yeah.
as a Christian. But that's I think what we're called to is
And
to do the
it
right
could
thing.
cost you friends.
It
It's
could cost
just
us friends. Yep.
yeah.
Like my father once actually told me about an instance, and this is not me railing against unions or strikes, because I think there are cases when, you know, striking is, I mean, it's a constitutional right. You can do it.
Mhm.
I'm not saying anything about the morality of strikes. But my father tells me about one time when he was younger, his like they were all everyone went out in the picket line, and he felt that he couldn't. He felt morally that would be a affront to his conscience to go out in the picket line, and so he stayed at work and crossed the picket line, and he took a lot of
Oh,
flack
yeah.
for that, as you
I
would, right?
bet.
And that's not me commenting on the morality of strikes. It's more to point that that's the sort of courage I think we need. That if we know that something is wrong in our hearts, and things sometimes are a bit gray, and it's got to do with how does God work on your conscience on that matter.
Right.
But we have to have the courage to say, when we feel that prick of conscience, to say, I'm going to act on that, and I'm just going to have to accept the costs if they come.
Right. And so again, the main point that you were saying then, when we asked the question about preparing for this kind of thing, the situations that we're going to face, a great deal of this is about becoming a godly person before you actually think about what it is you're going to be dealing with specifically at the workplace. The main point is to become a good, godly man or woman.
Right. Exactly. And then to make sure that we don't compartmentalize once we start pursuing that. So we pursue Christ and become a godly man or woman, and we make sure that we're not separating the person Daniel is at church from the person Daniel is at work.
Well, so save that, like at church, you can talk about certain things that you won't talk about at work, and work, you can talk about certain things you can't talk about at church.
Well,
I really don't want to know about your job at church. Sorry, dude.
Right. I guess. I mean, but I think even there is a degree to which, as much as I've told you to downplay the saying, there is a degree to which, I think it's important to talk as if you're at church. Like when people ask me, what did you do the weekend? Oh, I went to church. And then let's not be afraid to talk about all the things that we did, and bring out, like, I went to Bible study. We were studying this. Now, they don't need to you don't need to then turn that into a moment to preach to them. But
absolutely.
But they're at the same time, we shouldn't be afraid and try to hide our Christianity from our workplace either.
So I think what I would say, and I would say that we can compartmentalize our work roles from our family roles, from our social roles, but we are always going to be a Christian in our work role, a Christian in our social role, and a Christian in our church role, and we should be. And John Troke actually threw up a comment while we were talking about the difficulty that we have in doing it because we're compartmentalizing, and he added the thing about more people working at home, especially with COVID and things. And I think John actually does work at home, so I may have to interview him about that at some point, and godliness while you work at home.
Mm-hmm.
But in any case, that'll be later.
Yeah.
All right. I'm not noticing any too many more comments in the sidebar. Is there anything else you'd like to say before we wrap this up?
I think we largely covered it, to be honest, unless there's any questions people have.
Well, if you say that, we're going to have to stay on for another minute or two so that they have time to, after the lag catches up, and then.
Right.
So.
Yeah. No. I mean, I think we kind of largely covered the whole thing. I think it's yeah.
All right. Well, thank you for joining me here, Daniel. Would you be willing to do this again? I'm putting this online so that I can, have evidence against
you.
We
can do this another time. Yeah.
Excellent.
I got to catch up to John Troke. Number of appearances.
Okay. Okay. Well, apparently you have to boil the kettle, so we should probably wrap this up. Yeah. In any case, thank you everyone for watching this. I hope this has been useful. Thank you, Daniel, for showing up and for helping us out here. And I look forward to seeing you again some point in the future. And I look forward to seeing all of you at some point in the future, again, as we continue doing these kinds of things. Just in case you guys are interested, we do still have church on Sunday morning. If you want to sign up for Calvary Baptist Church, go to calvarybaptistnl.ca. There'll be a little link there that you can sign up to show up, or you can just be on these channels on Sunday morning at 11 a.m. Newfoundland time, and our church service will be live streamed. Unfortunately, I will be preaching, so I won't be watching, but you can hear me preach on Sunday morning. Anyway, thank you very much for your time. God bless, and have a great night.
Good night, guys.